welcome to this provocative and heartfelt podcast, Beyond Patriarchal Sex, a place for both women and men to elevate ourselves, finding out what it takes to live beyond our conditioning and assumptions, not only for ourselves, but for the coming generations. My name is Devashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these conversations. Okay, everyone. Before I had the clear vision for my forthcoming book with the title Stop Having Patriarchal Sex, which names so blatantly what almost everyone knows is happening, but it just hadn't been a term, a phrase that people commonly use in conversation until now. And it's a term, patriarchal sex, that everyone kind of knows what it means, even if they've never heard it exactly put like that before. This whole project really has taken on a life of its own to the extent that I am listening to it directing me on the next steps to take. It seems to have its own destiny, which I am a midwife for. And in regards to what patriarchal sex is, you may have heard me say in the welcome episode that I'm inviting this to be a collective discovery of what patriarchal sex actually is. And because of that, for the full definition, you will need to read the forthcoming book to totally understand, because it takes a whole book to properly explain it and do it justice. Because while I could give you my own definition based on my personal and professional experience, I would honestly rather be with you in the inquiry so that we open it right up, learning to take an unflinching look at this elephant in the room so it's no longer hidden from view. It's just like that story of the three blind men and an elephant. Have you heard this before? I remember the story, but I thank ChatGPT for filling me in on the details. So, once upon a time, in a quiet town full of thinkers, a group of blind men were invited into a grand room. Sitting in the middle of the room was something enormous and silent and unknown. Each blind man was led to a different part of this mysterious creature to explore it with his hands. The first blind man felt the tusk. He says, "Ah, it's a spear." The second grabbed the trunk and said, "Clearly it's a snake." The third patted the side and said, "No, it's a wall." The fourth held the tail and said, "Obviously it's a rope." And the fifth touched an ear and said, "It's a fan." Of course, it's a fan. And the sixth blind man wrapped his arms around the leg and said, "It's a tree trunk." And they argued and they insisted that each of the men, that he alone knew the truth. But what none of them realized is that they were all describing different parts of an elephant, one massive being that couldn't fully be grasped from one single angle. And here's the twist in the story. The rest of the townspeople could see the elephant. In fact, it was so huge and out of place that it dominated the entire room. But no one spoke of it. It was the elephant in the room. Too awkward, too controversial, too disruptive to acknowledge. So while the blind men argued about fragments, the sighted guests looked away in denial, and together they missed the truth entirely. The moral of the story is about how we often argue over fragments of reality that are shaped by our experiences, our traumas, our perspectives, while ignoring the bigger, uncomfortable truth standing in plain sight. So whether it's patriarchy, collective trauma, systemic oppression, unspoken pain in a relationship, and early attachment trauma in this case, everyone is touching a part of it, but few are willing to name the whole elephant. So everyone, calling it patriarchal sex and being willing to discover truthfully what that really means is naming the whole elephant. The open curiosity in this inquiry is everything, and it's very intentional. And as an example of that curiosity in action, I want to share something with you. And it also gives you a sense of the type of women who are already inside my community. I got this message from one of these gorgeous hearted women who happens to be a training graduate with me, which means she has dived very deeply into herself as a woman, with other teachers as well around healing and therapy, sexuality, spirituality. And so, although she's very invested in her education and her growth, she wrote this to me, and I will quote her exactly. She says, "Personally, I have found it hard to engage with this topic of patriarchal sex because it's so alive for me within myself and therefore my relationship." And she says, "Because of me, not my partner. But it feels very much like an edge, and I'm currently exploring it in real time." Sincere self-inquiry, everyone. This is what this community is all about. Why? Inner freedom, healing, and liberation. Speaking for the women in this community, we want to learn how to embody our full capacity for love and connection. In the Tigress Path, we're women who've been in personal development for many years. We are very much seeing profound results from our practices like Tigress Yoga. And alongside that, we are ever willing to explore what is unconscious within us so that we can be free from suffering and live our full potential. This is the caliber and honesty that it takes to actually let this inquiry in of what patriarchal sex is. And so, this one woman's example that I spoke is a beautiful way of describing the level of self honesty and curiosity that it takes to be part of this conversation here. And I can say more about why the focus on patriarchal sex too, because while it's essential for women to have women's only environments and men to have men's only environments, especially for certain types of embodied learning, we also need more ways of coming together. So, why mention patriarchy in regards to sex in particular? Because I could also name patriarchal relating, patriarchal finances, patriarchal birth, but it's being referred to and focused on here as patriarchal sex because lovemaking is a place where internal patterns get revealed the most. In sex is it comes out how you see and feel about yourself and your inner identity underneath the surface. It all becomes clear here. The way you have sex is so impactful that it's defining your reality. It's defining your experience of him. It's defining your experience of her. It's defining your experience of yourself because your erotic essence is that powerful. It's where you find out what your nervous system is actually wired for currently, despite all your intellectual understandings and concepts about that. And so, by the way, yes, this is all still relevant if you don't have now or are not looking to get into a relationship, because patriarchal sex is still going to show up in how you either masturbate or self-pleasure as well. If you value the messages being shared here, please do follow and subscribe because that helps enormously to get this podcast in front of new listeners around the world. Leaving a review on Apple Podcasts also helps a lot too. I would love to hear how this touches you. And may we all be free from suffering. And so, where you really are at in your embodiment journey as a woman or as a man, it culminates here in sex, the mostly non-cognitive expression of your inner programming in action. When the term patriarchal sex came to me as part of the title, I had not yet heard of Robert Jensen, who has an essay on patriarchal sex, where he discusses how societal norms often define sex in ways that prioritize male pleasure and control, leading to experiences that can be disempowering for women. That's the description of his essay. And side note, I do love that this was written by a Robert and not a Roberta. You can find his essay online if you're interested. It's Robert Jensen with an E. And although my inquiry is presented as an open-ended question, I can leave you with a few generalizations that are also a beginning to the answer of this ongoing question of what patriarchal sex is. It could be said as the disconnect between heart and sex that doesn't allow the actual frequency of love to be felt in the bodies in the moment of the people in the sexual experience. Exposing and presenting the term patriarchal sex for just a short time so far in my existing community has already got women questioning their reference to sex as making love when they're invited to really realize that is there actual love being made though? Is it just a saying, or is sex meant to be about making more love? Of course, but many factors are in the way of that profoundly beautiful place for lovers to meet themselves and each other in. Pornography being one of those factors, where the viewers are given a very warped view of what women want and how sex should be because it presents a male-centric patriarchal fantasy. It's a poor simulation of intimacy between actors, and basically, it's a guide on how to take from a woman without loving her. And unfortunately, this is the dominant sex education that men, boys, and increasingly more girls are taking in. While some may find benefits to aspects of porn, and am aware that there are many different types of porn, I am referring to the typical misogynistic scenarios enacted out, which are very much now the norm. And they have taught men to be so unappealing to a woman that she might rather be on her own than continue to endure his fixation on patriarchal sex, assuming that that's how sex is meant to be. And from there, enter the loneliness epidemic and how that affects men and women. And yes, there are many patriarchal relating factors around the patriarchal sex that are part of disconnection that leads to divorce, for example. But patriarchal sex is where it becomes very clear what the patterns are underneath the words or concepts. Now, what I just spoke, of course, doesn't speak for absolutely everyone. I'm very aware that there are a multitude of other experiences that go on that could also be called patriarchal sex. And I look forward to highlighting many of those other ways in the coming episodes. This one that was mentioned, though, is a very common theme which has been confirmed over and over again from both men and women in the research surveys so far. It seems to be in everyone's favor to stop having patriarchal sex because of the usual feeling of emptiness, of feeling used, feeling disappointed, like it wasn't meaningful. And both men and women reported these things. And you could say it's mild, but really, these are very corrosive experiences to happen over and over and over again. It's very destructive to harmony and togetherness in relationship. And of course, it escalates from the milder end all the way through to more extreme situations like women being impregnated without their consent as a way of trying to keep her, and women who've had to take themselves to the ER for pelvic surgery after the sex was too rough and she felt afraid to ask for it to be more attuned to her body, and women who are just literally no longer alive to tell their stories. Have you heard of the young boy handling a young girl recently with such a lack of care that she's crying in pain during sex? And when he was asked why he did not stop, he said, because girls always cry in sex, that's what happens in porn. And it's been happening for quite a while now, where a lot of young girls are not even experiencing that first kiss with a boy before giving him head. And young girls and young women thinking that they're meant to be strangled in sex because apparently that's normal now, whether she actually wants it or not. And other consequences of patriarchal sex carry all the way through to full-on physical assault, fear for her life, and of course, rape and murder. They're all examples of patriarchal sex in action as well on their more extreme end. And coming back to the more everyday scenario, it is quite literally the pleasure gap, the orgasm gap of fixation on male orgasm and the female experience in many cases being an afterthought or just irrelevant. In the most common scenarios, the damage to trust and safety between a man and a woman, say in a heterosexual situation, that damage is not only in the moment, it stacks up over time, over years, resulting in broken families and more extreme behaviors that disconnect heart and sex. In the more typical expressions of patriarchal sex that have been reported in the survey so far, it's very clear that women suffer far more acutely as a result of patriarchal sex. But this is where I also go beyond just speaking up for the women only, because while men, especially in cultures that encourage men to maintain separation of heart and sex to show alpha masculinity, their consequences may not happen in the same way or straight away and acutely, typically as a woman. And if it does, it's usually because they're being violated, often at the hands of another man. However, the typical male consequences of patriarchal sex really do escalate over time and catch up with him later, because the distance that the lack of love in sex creates with their partner gradually turns into conflict and depression, addiction, divorce, loneliness, financial loss, and even suicide. And the statistics of male suicide are alarming. And if you don't think these extreme issues for men are to do with just about everyone normalizing patriarchal sex as well, that's just sex, isn't it? Then we may be wrong about that. Dissolve patriarchal sex with greater understanding about each other, and many serious issues affecting men and women's health automatically disappear. Please know that in this podcast, there are going to be some episodes coming that do focus more on the female experience, just like there are going to be some episodes that focus more on the male experience, and it's intentional. Because if I or the guests that I invite to speak with me in this conversation, if any one of us are trying at all moments to speak for everyone, then the essence of each important message gets lost. There are important messages to tell when we zoom in. And so this podcast, this research, and this coming book is a place for all of it to come out. I'm holding space for all of it, just not all at the same time in the same moment, because that's just impossible. Specialists in relationships, intimacy, sex, prevention of violence, children's mental health, and other important social issues around this topic are warmly welcomed to join me in this conversation. So thank you for being here today, and I will see you on the next episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Feel free to let me know in a review. And if you have not yet taken the survey, please consider being part of our research in this way. It doesn't take long to answer. It will ask you to reflect on your experiences while giving you the chance to express yourself. Your honest responses about your personal experiences of patriarchal sex and relating are recorded anonymously, contributing to research that reveals the exact ways men and women can find more harmony together. Sharing the survey can, by the way, be a great conversation starter between friends, partners, and even family. The Patriarchal Sex Research Survey can be found at my website, thetigresspath.com/book.